Well, good morning, friends of Mordecai. All right. So, as a quick review, we're going through the book of Esther. And who's Mordecai? Does the name ring a bell at all? So he is, in relation to Esther, who is he? Yes, he's her uncle. Though we don't know exactly what happened, but Esther's mom and dad died, or something happened, and so Mordecai really ended up raising her, and so he's not her biological father, but we would say he is her dad in a sense concerning attachment and emotional relationship and whatnot. And so, he's a servant to Xerxes, the emperor of the Persian Empire, right? And what did he discover, as we found out last week? He discovered something was afoot, right? That a couple eunuchs wanted to get rid of him. And eunuchs really hold a lot of great power because they do a lot of stuff in the running of an empire back then. And so, but Mordecai, since he's always checking on Esther to see how things are going, he kind of knows the eunuchs well because she's in one of the there's two groups of concubines, and she's now in the non-virgin group of concubines. And of course, so, during all of this, he either overhears, but more likely he probably heard through reliable sources that a couple eunuchs wanted to kill Xerxes, and so he tells Esther. Esther passes this on to Xerxes and lets Xerxes know that it was her uncle who actually, unraveled the plot. And yet what we'll find out is that you think, oh, well, let me reward this guy for his loyalty and serving me this way, but he gets the big zilch. It's as if, oh, thanks, and then he just forgets about Mordecai, which is kind of odd considering he saved his life, right? So now we're going to come across Esther's nemesis. Dun, dun, dun. And that's Esther chapter 3. So we're going to begin with that, okay? So let's read verse 1. After these things, that's all the stuff that happened before, the plot and Mordecai's actions and whatnot, right? After these things, I'm just going to say, as you know, I'm just saying Xerxes instead of Ahasuerus, which is really a transliteration of the Hebrew. After these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. Okay, so even though Haman was kind of high up, what position is he now? He's as high as you can get without being the emperor. So he's the one who's really his kind of his right-hand man. And so he's his advisor. Xerxes will say, do blah, 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 and that may be it. And it's really Haman who will carry all these things out. So Xerxes kind of sets the stage, says this is what we want to do, but it's really people underneath him who really carry all these things out and advise him, right? Of course, Haman is an Agagite, and so Agagites and Israelites, there's this kind of long hatred between these two groups of people, right? And so, so Saul and Agag fought, and Saul spared his life. And in a sense, the Agagites have been hounding the Israelites ever since, right? And so, here we have an Agagite, right? And we have Mordecai, who is descended from Saul. So in a sense, we have a metaphorical replay between these two forces taking place in the book of Esther, right? And will Mordecai, in a sense, take care of what Saul should have, right? To get rid of this festering cancer, toward the people of Israel or not. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But right now, Haman is like number 2 in the kingdom. He's up there, right? So the irony is, of course, what did Haman do? Right, Mordecai saved his life, and yet Haman we find is being promoted. We don't know how much time has passed between those events. We know some time has passed. But we can infer, or maybe the text can be implying in a small way, that Haman maybe took some credit for this. Well, yeah, but I was the one who really knew all this stuff, and anyway, we don't know, but the hunch seems to be the case, because he's benefiting. So Haman seems to be one of these guys. You ever work with somebody who takes credit for somebody else's work? Don't we hate those people? Like, oh man, blah, 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 right? And so, people get wise to that sort of thing, and people start despising someone who acts that way, because they'll just as soon betray their mother, if it would help them get ahead. Okay? Well, let's read verses 2 through 4. And all the king's servants and all the king's and all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman. I don't know. So now this word homage has become homage for whatever weirdness it is, but it's homage, if you're an old school English reader, right? Bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So what is going on now? Of course, he's second to the king, so respect should be owed. But you notice he commanded this? So in a sense, he's pushy, right? Well, I expect this. And so rather than saying, well, I'm second in the realm, and let my deeds earn the respect of the people, because I'm new in this position, right? But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Well, it's Haman's command. But if Haman's the king's right-hand man, he comes with the king's authority, even if he oversteps his bounds as far as people below him are concerned, right? They don't know whether something came from Haman or whether it came from the king through Haman. So you assume everything that comes from Haman is really from the emperor. Okay? And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Okay. What do we have going on here? So Haman refuses to bow down to Haman, right? Now this isn't, there's different types of reverence, homage, whatever the term may be. And so we should have no problem bowing down to another human if it's not worshiping them as if they were God. So, so it was not wrong for him to do this. See, the only issue would be is if in the context that bowing down would actually say that you are a god and the real God is not. See, that's idolatry, whereas this is simply respect. Okay? We don't really do that sort of thing, but how do we show respect if, say President Biden comes to visit? He's the president, right? Doesn't matter whether he has dementia or not. He's still the president. So when he walks into the room, what do? Well, we would stand, right? Out of respect, okay? So that's how we would show that in our culture. And certainly no one would go, oh, well, you can't stand because... See, so we understand these distinctions. It's just there are particular forms which may have more than one purpose, okay? So it's not as if Mordecai couldn't do that because it would mean that he's being unfaithful to God. No. So there's animosity between both. And my hunch is this, that Haman claimed credit somehow for saving the emperor's life. And he's an Agagite and Mordecai's a Jew. And so the old animosities just kind of bubbled up and became fresh. Okay? We're going to find out that Mordecai is one of these people who easily bears a grudge and has a long memory concerning such things. Which means what? When people are like that, they're usually miserable, aren't they? I mean, if they're quick to anger and slow to, right? It's the very opposite. So, but let's read verse 5 and kind of see what happens concerning this, okay? So, and when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. Now, this word, so, okay, we'll take a momentary break. Okay, ask a question. I do? I make Julian behave? Well, if I could do that, I'll just kind of go, behave, Julian. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, let me say hi to Julian. Well, hello, Julian. Yeah. In a few years, you might be big enough for adult Sunday school. Well, maybe in more than a few years. All right. Oh, okay. Well. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, so I'll need to talk to your mom and dad, and we'll have to do a few more things, but I'm glad you're interested, okay, and that's how it should be, okay? So, okay, all right. So the word that's used in the text, fury, that's the same one that described Xerxes' anger toward Vashti. So, and if we were listening to this and we were native Hebrew listeners, we would go, whoa, man, what happened to Vashti, right? Banished, right? Banished forever away from the emperor. And so, is that going to happen to Mordecai, right? Of course, from what we can tell, reading between the lines, Xerxes banished Vashti, but at least it doesn't seem as if he had killed her, because when he's starting to miss her and thinking, oh man, I kind of messed up by doing this, the emperor's courtiers and whatnot all kind of rushed to distract the emperor, to distract Xerxes, which makes me think that she's still alive. Of course, if the emperor rescinds a previous edict, well, that kind of undercuts his authority, because they're not supposed to be rescindable, even by the emperor himself. Okay? So it's pretty bad, okay, this hatred that's stewing within Haman, okay? And in verse 6 kind of further amplifies or explains this hatred. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Okay? So this is on the top of page 2. There's a bit of a more literal translation, which I think helps convey the anger stewing within Haman. And he, that is Haman, despised with his eyes even to lay his hand on Mordecai himself. for they told him of Mordecai's people. See, so the point being made is that he doesn't even want to dirty himself by touching Mordecai. He considers him so low that that would be defiling himself. That's the point being made. Okay? That, so in other words, I may pet a dog, but I won't touch Mordecai. So if anything needs to be done, he's going to have his underlings deal with Mordecai, but he himself does not want to touch Mordecai because he so despises him and considers him unworthy of being touched by him. I mean, when you think about that, what is Haman's view of himself? Oh man, the dude is so full of hot air, I'm surprised he's not floating to the sun. Wow, right? And so, so Haman has stoked this intense hatred. And to be fair here, there was no reason why Haman needed to do that. He could have easily, bowed in respect to Haman, if not the person, to his position. Okay? I mean, I hope we can still make that distinction, right? We seem to have lost it with the last president, right? That a lot of people, it doesn't matter what. There was this intense Trump hatred. It doesn't matter whether he's the president. And now there's this, mockery of President Biden because, we elected a man with Alzheimer's, right? So, but he's still in the office. And I'm just hoping somebody in the family will say, Dad, husband, it's time to retire. Okay.
Why did he keep going through the gate?
Oh, okay. Well, the gate, that's where he serves. Mordecai does. See, and so in other words, so he represents Xerxes at a lower level where he's rendering decisions that have the effect of Xerxes' authority to resolve things. See? So, somebody can go to the emperor, but it's kind of like going to the Supreme Court, right? Well, if you have an issue, you don't go to the Supreme Court. It works its way up, right? So if someone were to go to the emperor himself, it would have to be a pretty big deal. And, to go before the emperor is kind of fraught with uncertainty, because if you go in there and you say, you just wasted my time, you loser, it could end up being really bad for you. So you really need to make sure that if you're petitioning the emperor himself,
so he was like a lower court judge.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Don. So Don said he's like a lower court judge. Okay. So let's look at verse 7. In the first month, which is a month of Nisan, so this is, referencing the Jewish calendar, not the Persian calendar. Okay. In the 12th month of King Ahasuerus. So when did the book of Esther begin? In the 3rd year. So this is the 12th year, so now it's been what? 9 years? Around 9 years have passed. Okay. They cast that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Okay, so Haman is casting lots, and really that's like the closest equivalent for us would be like dice. You're trying to use this as a way to decide something. Okay? So what Haman is doing, he's using this to decide when he's going to approach the emperor or when he's going to carry out his plan. It's just the Hebrew text is a little vague, okay? But we'll know this, see, in when we get to verse 8 where it starts with then. See, so the ESV interprets the text to say that Mordecai was trying to figure out the day to approach the emperor for his grand plan to kill all the Jews. So kind of adopting Nazi phraseology, the final solution for the Jews, right? At least within Persia. Okay? So let's read verse 8. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. Whoa. Wait a minute. If somebody's in the empire, what do you mean doesn't keep the king's laws? Right? That's so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. So here on the bottom of page 2 is kind of a little breakdown, right, of what Haman implies and what he says. So there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of the kingdom. So a certain people, there's one group of people among all the others in your kingdom, right? So right there, one, and everyone else is playing by the rules, but this one group is not. At least he's plowing the ground for that. Because there's something different about this one group. Oh, it's only one. But hey, if one group gets away with something, right? So if you want to run a tight ship, you can't let one group, in a sense, get away with stuff like this. Because why do I have to follow the rules? Right? And then it leads to the chaos and disorder. So, implication, if these certain people are so easily identified, they must be unassimilated into the Persian Empire. And that means this is bad. Okay? Their laws are different from those of every other people. Though true, this doesn't mean that what follows must also be true. So, okay, different people groups kind of have their own traditions, but he's kind of using the word laws, like, right? And implied, therefore, they do not keep the king's laws. Well, this is bad for Persia. Everybody within the empire is supposed to follow Xerxes' orders. Okay? Otherwise, what do you have? It's craziness, right? Conclusion, it is not in the king's profit to tolerate them. It is in your best interest to get rid of these unassimilated, non-law-abiding people. So, I mean, the way he kind of couched this of Xerxes is just saying, get out of here, you whatever, you windbag. But if he's open to him, he's kind of like, take care of it. We can't have this. And remember, there's cracks forming in the empire. Okay? And Xerxes knows this. So he does not want to allow anything to happen which is going to, shall we say, allow rebellion to take place, or something to fester which will later cause a rebellion. And that could happen if you're too authoritarian and mean, and it could also happen when you just let things go and people disrespect you. Okay, so he has to walk that middle ground. Okay, and so, now historical background on page 3. Xerxes dealt with a revolt in Egypt in the first year of his reign, 485 BC. Later, he had to suppress revolts in Babylon, which is what? The empire the Persians captured, right? In both 484 and 482 BC. So we're talking what? We're talking several rebellions which he squashed, but they still took place. Okay? So experience taught him to squash a rebellion before it became a problem. This Haman knew. So Haman he knows the king's thinking. I need to be proactive. I need to take care of this stuff before it gets bad. And so he knows the way the king's thinking, and he just what? Sets these dominoes up so that way well, then take care of it, because I don't want another rebellion. And this group is throughout the empire, and they don't really honor and follow the king's laws. That means what? You can have an empire-wide ruckus. Oh, he does not want that. So this is really bad for the Jews, because that's who he's setting up, right? So anyways, Now, there's a little bit of wordplay going on, which we would catch later in Hebrew if we were listening to this, okay? So it is not in the king's profit to tolerate them. Really, a better translation would be to leave them alone. I mean, tolerate conveys the idea. But, you know, in the old days, Hebrew was only, you had certain letters, and there were a few that came with some vowel sounds, but most not at all, right? And so it's not until like between the 8th and 10th century AD where you get these little vowel markings at the bottom of the Hebrew letters, which let you know how to pronounce the word. So you should see it and you should kind of know what the word is by context. So sometimes it could be 3 or 4 different words, depending on how you pronounce the vowels, you know, with the letters. Okay? And so here there's a little bit of wordplay. To leave them alone, and that's lahania. Okay? So, and so it's the exact same word for to give respite or to give rest with the letters themselves, but the vowels sound slightly different. So leave them alone, lanania, to what? Give them respite, to give them rest. Lahania. See, so it's almost very similar, right? But what's going to happen is with Purim, which is based on the word for lots or dice, right? The Israelites will get rest. So the very thing that Haman is trying to do by saying, don't give them any respite, don't let them alone, don't let them be, is actually going to allow the Israelites to have rest when all this stuff comes through. Okay, so that's the wordplay here, that when we hear this later, we'll go, oh, okay, we're going to catch that irony, that Haman's actions backfired. The very thing he wanted actually ended up kind of happening. Well, the opposite happened. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, how is he going to affect all this? Let's look at verse 9. Okay? So he talked to the emperor. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. He didn't say who these people are, right? So you would think, well, who are they? How long have they been in the empire? Are they a real threat? I mean, you know, maybe there were discussions like this. The text of Esther doesn't say, but, right? But check out what he does. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it in the king's treasuries. What is he doing? He's bribing the king. Now that was acceptable back then. In our culture, it's not. What? But it was acceptable, but the amount is absurd. Okay? So, I don't think Haman even has this amount. I mean, when you look at and you know, so Herodotus, a Greek historian, mentions this sort of stuff. And so the only way that makes sense to me is, okay, well, when I kill all the Jews and I'm going to confiscate their property, I'll be rich. And then I'll give the king what I told him that I would, and I'll pocket the rest. See? So, well, if you kill all the Jews and take all their property and wealth, right? Oh, he's going to be the wealthiest man in the kingdom. So he can afford this. He can't do that now. Okay? So, whew, man, he's kind of banking a lot, right? That all of this is going to happen and that he's able to carry this out. But he's sweetening the pot as much as possible, which then was an acceptable practice. Okay? So we shouldn't see it necessarily as corruption. Okay? Okay? So let's continue on. Let's look at verses 10 and 11. So he says it's in your best interest not to have a rebellion, and I'm going to give into your treasury. I mean, that's more than some, like, when you have different layers of the bureaucracy or leadership in the empire, that's less than some people gave to fight the Greeks. So, wow. Okay? So let's look at verses 10 and 11, and we'll see how how Xerxes kind of plays this, okay? So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. So he's the enemy of the Jews, but he hasn't told that to Xerxes. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. So he's being kind of wishy-washy what he says about the money. And it's deliberately ambiguous. So on page 3, we kind of unfolded the possible different meanings. And so Xerxes is kind of doing this deliberately. Okay? So Xerxes could be refusing the money, which on the surface it kind of looks like that. Or he could be bargaining to determine the amount of bakshish, which is bribery, that Haman will offer. Or maybe he is saying tongue-in-cheek, the money's yours, meaning if you want to give the money to me, I'll take it. So, with this ambiguity, it would be in Haman's best interest to deliver. So what Xerxes is doing, he's basically coming across like, I don't really need your money. But it's ambiguous enough to say where Haman, reading between lines, says, yeah, but I better deliver. See? So, because if you're the ruler, you don't want to appear needy, right? And yet, so it's pretty slick what happens. Okay. So now things are going to unfold, okay? So that's that issue. Okay, now we're going to start with verse 12. Okay? Okay. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th month of the first month, 13th day of the first month. Now remember, Xerxes, he was one of these guys who wanted everything recorded for history, and that he periodically he would kind of review stuff because he wanted to be on top of things. And when the buck stops with you when you're running a huge empire, there's a lot of stuff that you'll miss and overlook, like rewarding Mordecai. And so, so there we have it. So the king's scribes, he summons them on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written in to the king's satraps, so that's a Persian word, okay, underlings, okay, and to the governors over all the provinces, to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in his own script and every people in its own language. So in other words, the Persian Empire is multicultural. So so whatever is the native language of a particular area, the edict is going out in Persian, but also, right, in the native tongue for an area. So that way nobody could say, well, I didn't know, right? So it was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Though to whom did he give the ring? Haman. Okay, so he's placing a lot of trust, because if you have the ring, you could do lots of crazy stuff and use it. That's like, you've seen this in the movies where you get like the wax seal thing, right? And so if Haman is duplicitous, he could send out stuff pretending it's from the king and no one would know any different. See, it has the king's seal of authority. Okay, the problem could be is if he does something that's not that the king says is not within your expected area of authority, then he could get in trouble. Okay, so he's given a lot of free rein. Okay, so it's pretty crazy. Okay, so since the king gave him the ring, who's the real author of the edict? Haman. Exactly. Okay? So, now the 13th day of the first month, that's the day before Passover. So what is Haman wanting to do? He wants to kill the Jews the day before Passover. I mean, this is a deliberate choice to insult the Jews as badly as you can insult them, right? Before, because that's one of the three great festivals, okay? There's no temple, But originally, the Passover was celebrated, right, in Egypt, each family. Okay, and so it had kind of devolved back to that because there was no temple now where it had kind of went to, and now it's going back to kind of its original institution. Okay, so this is just really bad. You couldn't make it much worse. Okay, so let's. Okay, and then so on page 4, there's a little blurb about kind of, Herodotus, the same Greek historian, describes the Persian Empire, and he said that there's postal stations every 14 miles, and that fresh horses waited at each station. And what does this sound like in American history? Exactly, it's just like the Pony Express. And so the horse rider, boom, right, and he takes what he has, puts it on the next horse. The other horse rests, gets on the new horse, and boom, until a new rider eventually takes over. But by doing the Pony Express, you're able to deliver mail fairly quickly. So it's not as if we were the ones who came up with the Pony Express idea, right? I mean, anybody who was half literate of Scripture knew, and it's probably where the Pony Express idea came from. Oh, well, that's what the Persian Empire did. I read about it in Esther. And there you go, right? So, and here's kind of, and this even sounds like our U.S. Postal Service kind of motto, at least it used to be, right? Neither snow, rain, heat, nor gloom of night keeps these valiant couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. I mean, that almost sounds like that, isn't it something similar, that whatever it is, it will not keep, anyway, yeah. So here's the edict, which the Septuagint contains and the Hebrew text does not. Okay? The great king Artaxerxes, to the ruler in the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, and who hold authority under him, thus decrees, ruling over many nations and having gained dominion over all the world. So, blah, 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 all the typical standard, how great is our ruler, right? Not motivated by the power of authority, but ever conducting himself in moderation and unceasing gentleness. Yeah, right? Doesn't this sound like propaganda? I was desiring to make the lives of my subjects continually tranquil and to maintain the kingdom calm and safe to its furthest borders. That he is trying to do. Because based on what Haman told him, this people group, they need to go away because it's going to cause chaos and unrest in the empire, the kingdom. Okay? And to restore peace desired by all men. But when I inquired of my counselors how this should be done, Haman, who excels in good sense among us, I wonder who wrote that, and have been shown unwavering in goodwill and unshakable in fidelity, and has attained the second place in the kingdom. Okay, isn't this supposed to be coming from Xerxes? So what does this tell you about who wrote it? Who's scratching his own back here? Of course, he scratches the king's back first, right? Oh boy. Okay. Made known to us that there is a race of people full of ill will who are mixed with all the other races throughout the whole world, whose laws are contrary to all the other nations, and they continually disregard the ordinances of the king, or of the kings, meaning what? Xerxes on down. But is that true? No. It's true that they're scattered throughout the empire, and the Jews see themselves as a distinct people. All that's true, but they do not continually disregard the order. Wow. Thus, the joint administration blamelessly administered by us cannot be performed. Okay? Therefore, we have determined that this people alone is in opposition to every other person, entertaining a strange code of laws, and not disposed to our affairs, and perpetrating the worst evils, and thus the kingdom is not able to experience stability. So if you're picking on a people group who really are not bad for the kingdom, it's actually bad for good order, right? And this is going out, and now you're alienating a people who are actually good citizens. So whenever the authorities do that, it does not bode well for the nation or kingdom. Okay, so this is going to have a bad effect if it were to happen. Therefore, we have designated all those who made known to you in the letters written by Haman, who is appointed over such matters, and who is our second father, to root out and destroy all of them with their wives and children without any mercy, sparing no one, on the 14th day of the 12th month of Adar of this present year, that this race of people, both from before and until now hostile to us, violently going down to death in one day, may afterwards secure for us a time that is tranquil and undisturbed state of affairs. Now, if you're Jewish, what are you going to do? Right? And you realize that this is really talking about you. It doesn't actually mention that, did it? But it just says, but I mean, if you could read between lines, you're like, I think he's talking about us. So you're like, okay, well, let's flee, or whatever it may be, or let's go into hiding. Okay. According to the edict, what does Xerxes want for the Persian Empire? He wants peace. He wants stability. He wants order. And he does. And that comes through even though Haman is the author of this edict. Why? Because Haman is congratulated almost as much as King Xerxes. Right? So according to the edict, what are the Jews unnamed guilty of causing within the Persian Empire? Dissension, unrest, disloyalty, right? Which the king cannot brook. Okay? So what we're going to find out is, how will the Jews respond? Well, you know, this isn't the first time they've been picked on. Okay, so, I mean, hello. I don't think it takes much to say, who is scattered throughout the empire in a distinct people? So, yeah. So, it's not, you know, because, well, anyway, yeah. So most of the Jews would think, you know, I think he's really targeting us. Okay, so let's read verse 15. Okay. Verse 14. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. Okay, and so the couriers do all that, right? What ends up happening is, of course, the Jewish people do the sackcloth and ashes thing, which is typical standard fare in the Old Testament, you know, for the ancient Jews as a sign of repentance. Okay, and so there's a little excursus on that, right? In the Old Testament, people often fasted and put on sackcloth. You know what sackcloth is? It's like like itchy, uncomfortable, like burlap-y stuff, right? So you're not wearing fine. All of this is to lament a particular situation, right? And so whatever station or wealth you may have, all that's removed from your person, right? So when you're coming before God, your earthly status doesn't matter, right? And so it doesn't matter whether you're rich and you could wear fine silks and linens, right? You might as well all be wearing sackcloth. Okay? So, and so, for example, so here's some sackcloth. King Ahab murdered Naboth to steal his vineyard. Prophet Elijah told him, where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, they will also lick up your blood. And then what does Ahab do? Sackcloth and ashes. So you remember that story, right, about Naboth and his vineyard? And yeah, so pretty bad, man. You know, but sackcloth and fasting are part of repenting, which the Israelites did after Nehemiah read them the law after returning from exile. So this is when the Jews lost their ability to read and understand Hebrew. So you had to have the scholars read the text and then translate it. And then the people go, wow, we've really wandered away from God. And so there's this national repentance, right? Daniel also fasted and wore sackcloth for the Israelites because we have sinned and done wrong. So when the Jews fasted and wore sackcloth, it was an act of repentance. They saw Xerxes' edict, if only in part, as a judgment against them for being unfaithful, which is not weird, because this is Old Covenant thinking. Old Covenant thinking is what? So you are my chosen people, and as a people, I will reward or punish you based on what? Your faithfulness. Okay? So that was kind of written, that was kind of from the very beginning of the covenant that God made with his people, and the people's response said this. So we will do everything the law commands. And then blood is sprinkled on the altar and on the people, right? So let's look at verse 15. So the Jews know that it's about them, and there we have it, okay? The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Why? Because there's this whole group of people who know they're all going to be killed. Of course it's going to be chaos, right? I mean, in a sense, it's like all the other things I was playing, that really doesn't matter, because I'm going to be dead in whatever day it is, okay? So who knows whether people are trying to flee but it is not good, okay? So there's pandemonium because, right, a whole bunch of people are going to be killed on a specific day. And the Jews kind of know this, because if it's the day before Passover, you'd have to be pretty stupid not to realize you're targeted. Okay? Oh, well, okay, so Haman is from a group of people who have had this long animosity or hatred toward the Jews. And so when Mordecai's actions basically just throw gas on his hatred and there wasn't any need to be that way. Now, that being said, Haman's response is over the top. You don't do something like that. I mean, it's going to harm the empire. But it's going to achieve his ends. And he's saying, but at the end of the day, they'll be gone. And it'll be better for the empire because we'll get rid of these people who we don't want, or I don't want, who cause problems. And so, but it's going to be very painful to get from where they are now to a Jewish free empire. Wow. I mean, that's, yeah. So, I mean, it's irrational. It really is. To, in a sense, harm your own kingdom for a personal vendetta. Okay? So, but that's kind of why. All right? So we'll continue on next week. There was a little bit of stuff where I kind of cheated and, but yeah. But brought that in because it just kind of made sense to kind of talk about the Jewish reaction and whatnot, okay? If there are no questions or discussion, we'll close with prayer. All right? Our Father, I'm grateful for the text of Esther because it just, wow, it kind of shows us how bad things could really get. And if these things could happen to any people at any place within any country. And so sometimes we are brought to focus to think, how should we react if something takes place in this way or that way? May we learn from their examples and recognize how they remained faithful in such a setting. May we always strive to be faithful, for your Son was faithful to us, irrespective of what happened. And for this, we are grateful, and for this reason, he has saved us. In whose name we pray. Amen.